Temujin made Jeb a squad leader under the command of his third son, Ugdai Wokuotai. After meeting with the third prince, Jeb met up with Balgurchi. Fooled by mutual respect, the two of them became fast friends. Feeling he owed Gojing a debt of gratitude, Jeb took great care in looking after the mother and son. He decided that he would begin teaching Gojing about the bow as soon as Gojing got a little older. On one particular day, Gojing was just tossing some rocks around with a couple of Mongolian kids when they saw two Mongolian riders flying into the camp, obviously carrying urgent news for the Khan. Not long after the two riders had entered Temujin's jair, the horns started to sound, causing the soldiers to pour out of their gurs. Temujin had an iron fist when it came to the training and discipline of his army. 10 soldiers were organized into a squad, which was led by a squad leader. The squads were ordered into platoons made up of 10 squads that were led by a 100-man commander. 10 100-man groups were led by a 1,000-man commander, which were then organized under one of the few 10,000-man commanders. When Temujin gave an order, it was as if he just moved his fingers and no order was disobeyed or not carried out. As Gojing and the other children looked on, and at the end of the first blow of the horns, all the soldiers had already picked up their weapons and mounted their horses. When the horn sounded for the second time, the world shook from the sound of men and beasts moving. By the time the third sounding of the horns came to a stop, the plain just outside of the main gates of the encampment was covered with some 50,000 mounted men and soldiers in formation. Other than the snorting of horses, there wasn't another sound, neither chuttering noises of conversations nor any sounds of weapons colliding. Temujin, escorted closely behind by his 3 eldest sons, walked out of the main gate. "We have beaten many foes and news of our feats has reached the great Jin Empire," he shouted at the top of his lungs. At this moment, the great Emperor of Jin has sent the 3rd prince and 6th prince here to officially anoint your Khan as a Jin officer. The soldiers, in unison, raised their sabers and shouted with joy. At that time, Jin controlled northern China with a fierce and strong army. Their empire was famous and powerful. On the other hand, the Mongols were just a small tribe among many in the middle of the steppe. That was the reason why Temujin would feel honored to be an official of the Jin Empire. Temujin ordered the eldest son Jochi to take 10,000 men with him to welcome and escort the guests, while the other 40,000 men lined up in formation, waiting. In reality, the Jurchen emperor at the time, Wanyanjing, who took the title of Zhangzong, was apprehensive of growing power of some tribes on the steppe, such as Temujin's tribe, the Togrul, Ongkhan's tribe, and the Karaits. Fearing that his northern neighbors would grow to be troublesome, he sent the Prince of Rong, his 3rd son Wanyan Hongxi, and the Prince of Zhao, his 6th son Wanyan Hongli, to anoint the leaders as officers of Jin. But in addition to tightening the ties of the tribes to Jin and increasing tributes, the princes had another mission: to scout the tribes and make note of the weakness of each so as to be able to gain the upper hand in case of future conflicts. The Prince of Zhao, Wanyan Hongli, was the same one that had traveled to Linan, was wounded by Quchujianok's village, and met the 7 freaks at Jiaxing. Gojing and the kids stood at a distance, trying to catch a glimpse of this happening. After a long wait, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon as Jochi met up with Wanyan Hongxi and Wanyan Hongli. The Wanyan brothers had with them 10,000 elite soldiers, each wearing silk capes, iron armor, and carrying a spear in the left hand and a wolf fang club in the right hand while riding on their horses. The clanging of the armor could be heard for many li around. As the army got closer, the silk shone and the armor glowed even more under the bright sun, creating a spectacular scene. The 2 brothers approached shoulder to shoulder, while Temujin, his sons, and generals waited by the roadside to welcome them. Seeing Gojing and all the other kids standing there staring at him, Wanyan Hongxi burst out laughing. He reached into his shirt and took out a handful of gold coins and tossed them towards the crowd of kids. "A gift for you kids," he shouted with a laugh, figuring that the kids would undoubtedly cheer and scramble around on the ground for the money, which would show off of his own magnanimity and wealth. However, host-guest etiquette and respect were of utmost importance to the Mongolians. Not only were his actions inappropriate for the occasion, it was very disrespectful. The Mongol generals and soldiers were left aghast at his actions. Every one of the kids was a son or daughter of the Mongolian soldiers and generals. Even though they were little, each of them had a sense of self-respect. As a result, none of them picked up the coins. His joy dampened, Wanyan Hongxi tossed another handful of gold coins and shouted, "Come on! Fight over them, little devils that you are." This caused an even bigger stir among the Mongols. Even though the Mongolians had no written language at the time and little culture, they placed a great deal of importance on politeness and respect, especially regarding guests. Mongolians, traditionally, never curse, even when facing a lifelong nemesis or just joking around. When someone enters their gurs, no matter if the person was a friend or not, that person would be treated with great respect and honor. By the same token, the guest must absolutely not disrespect his hosts either, for it was considered the greatest of insults. Even though what Wanyan Hongxi shouted was in Yurchin and none of the Mongols understood it, everyone could tell that he was cursing at the kids from his body language and the tone of his voice. Constantly being told stories of how the Jin rape, pillage, and steal from the people of China, of how Jin corrupted officials and had Yue Fei killed, Go Jing's young heart had long been filled with hatred for Jin. Now, seeing how rude this Jin prince was, he picked up a couple of gold coins from the ground and, taking a little run, threw them at Wanyan Hongxi with all his might. "Who would want your money?" he shouted. Wanyan Hongxi tilted his head sideways to avoid the coins. But nevertheless, one of them hit him squarely on the cheekbone. Even though Go Jing wasn't strong and it really didn't hurt, he was still made to look bad in front of tens of thousands of people. Every Mongolian from Temujin downwards cheered on the inside. Wanyan Hongxi was furious. When he was in China, he had many times killed people at his slightest displeasure. Never had he been humiliated like this. As his temper flared up, he grabbed the spear from the guard that was riding at his side and threw it at Go Jing's chest with all his might and shouted, "You want to die, you little bastard? Third brother, no!" Wanyan Hongli shouted, knowing this was bad. But he was too late. The spear was already on its way. Just as it looked as if Go Jing about died from the spear, an arrow suddenly shot out of the Mongolian army to the left. Like a meteor shooting around the moon, the arrow hit the spear dead on the head with a loud bang. Packed with incredible strength, the arrow was able to deflect the spear away despite being many times lighter. Go Jing immediately scrambled away. The Mongolian soldiers all cheered in unison, shaking the step. The person who shot the arrow was none other than Jeb. "Third brother, don't bother with him anymore," Wanyan Hongli whispered to his brother. Seeing and hearing the might of the Mongolian army, Wanyan Hongxi was a bit shaken, so he just shot a mean look at Go Jing and cursed under his breath. "Little bastard!" At this point, Temujin and his retainers had come forth to formally welcome the two Jin princes and took them into the main chair. There they served up kulmis and vast quantities beef and lamb. There were translators on both sides, translating between Yurchin and Mongolian. Wanyan Hongxi read the royal decree out loud, granting the title of the Northern Ambassador of the Empire of the Jin to Temujin. Temujin, who knelt on the floor during the reading, humbly accepted the official document and the golden belt, which signified his allegiance to the Jin Emperor. That night the Mongolians celebrated with a huge feast to entertain the honored emissaries. "Tomorrow, my brother and I are going to bestow a post on Ong Khan," Wanyan Hongxi, somewhat under the influence of kulmis, said to Temujin. "Will the ambassador join us?" Temujin was overjoyed at the news and immediately agreed to come along. Ong Khan, a Togrul, was the leader among the tribes on the steppe. His tribe was the richest and most powerful. Furthermore, he was a good man, always treating others as equals. It was no great exaggeration to say that he was respected and liked by every tribe. Ong Khan had once been the sworn brother of Temujin's father. After Temujin's father was poisoned by his enemies and Temujin had nowhere to go, it was Ong Khan who took him as a stepson. Not long after Temujin was married, his wife was taken away by the Merkits. It was only because of Ong Khan and Jamukha, Temujin's sworn brother, joining him that he managed to defeat the Merkits and save his wife. That was the reason Temujin was elated on hearing that Ong Khan would be granted a title as well. "Is the great Jin Empire going to grant titles to anyone else?" he asked. "No, that's all," Wanyan Hongxi replied. "But that's entirely because, up here in the north, there are only two great heroes, Ong Khan and the great Khan yourself." Wanyan Hongli immediately added onto his brother's statement. "None of the others are worthy. There is another person around here that perhaps your excellencies haven't heard of," Temujin replied. "Really? Who?" Wanyan Hongli asked. "He just happens to be your humble servant's sworn brother, Jamukha. He is a righteous man who is very adept at commanding an army. I humbly request that the third prince and the sixth prince consider granting him a title as well." Temujin and Jamukha were childhood friends who grew up together, and at that time they became sworn brothers. When Mongolians become sworn brothers, they call it swearing anda, which was Mongolian for a sworn brother. Mongolian tradition dictates that when swearing anda, the sides must exchange gifts. At the time, Jamukha gave Temujin a granite stone that resembled a deer T-bone, while Temujin gave Jamukha a granite stone that looked like it was made of brass. Mongolians used small granite rocks to hunt rabbits, but Mongolian kids often played catch with them and competed to see who threw them the furthest. After the two became antas, they went and threw rocks on the frozen Annan River. The next spring, while the two of them were out shooting arrows with their own little wooden bows, Jamukha gave Temujin a noisy arrowhead that he carved himself using two little ox horns. Temujin returned the gift with a cypress-tipped arrowhead, and the two of them swore to become anda once more. After they grew up, both of them lived with Ong Khan's tribe and were still very close. Every day they would compete to see who got up earlier. Whichever one got up earlier would get to drink 1 cup of komas out of Ong Khan's own jade cup. Later, after Temujin's wife was kidnapped and was rescued with the combined help of Jamukha and Ong Khan, Temujin and Jamukha exchanged gold and horses and became sworn anda to each other for the third time. The two of them drank out of the same cup in the day and slept in the same jir at night. However, having to migrate with the changing weather and rain, they and their tribes parted. As Temujin's tribe rose in fame and power, Jamukha's tribe was growing non-stop as well. Their friendship was still as strong as ever and was deeper than blood brothers. That's why Temujin, realizing that his brother was not being honored, would ask for him to be honored as well. "There are so many Mongolians, where can we find all the titles if we give one to each of them? How many titles do you think we have?" Wanyan Hongxi, half drunk, casually answered back without much thought. Wanyan Hongli shot his brother numerous meaningful looks trying to get him to stop, but was ignored. Feeling slighted because of the remark, Temujin offered, "Might your excellencies consider giving your humble servant's title to him instead? Are you belittling the titles of the great empire of Jin?" Wanyan Hongxi smacked his leg and shouted. Temujin slammed his palm down on his table and stood up in anger. Finally, barely holding back his fury, he did not say another word and grabbed his cup and drank its conger in one gulp. Wanyan Hongli immediately told a joke and changed the subject. The next morning, Temujin and his 4 sons organized 5,000 troops to escort Wanyan Hongxi and Wanyan Hongli to Ong Khan. By the time the sun was barely peeking over the distant horizon, Temujin had already mounted his horse and the 5,000 soldiers had already lined up in perfect formation. The Jurchen soldiers and generals, however, were still fast asleep. At first, Temujin was impressed by the Jurchen army's grandeur and organization. But after seeing what an undisciplined and fun-seeking group they were, he humphed and turned to Mukuli. "What do you think of the Jin army?" 1,000 of us Mongolian troops can defeat 5,000 of theirs," Muckily observed. "I've thought so too," Temujin replied with a smile. "But it's said that the Jin Empire has an army of over 1 million strong. We only have 50,000 people. 1,000,000 troops can't enter battle all at once," Muckily responded. "Divide and conquer, we can take down 10,000 today and then sweep another 10,000 tomorrow. When it comes to military strategy, your opinions are always the same as mine." Temujin smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "A 50-kilogram man can eat 10 cows that weigh over 10,000 kilograms. He just won't do it in one day." The two men burst out in laughter. Temujin settled back straight in his saddle and suddenly saw that Tului's horse was riderless. "Where's Tului?" he shouted in fury. Tului was just 9 years old, but Temujin had always been a harsh disciplinarian whether he was training troops or bringing up sons. He never showed mercy to anyone who violated his rules. With him shouting so loudly in anger, all the generals and troops immediately got a bad feeling in their stomachs. General Barokl, Tului's mentor, almost panicked and offered, "The kid has never overslept before, let me check." Just as he turned his horse to gallop off to search for Tului, he saw two kids come running up hand in hand. One of them, with a silk bandana on his head, was Tului while the other turned out to be Gojing. Tului ran straight towards his father and shouted, "Dad! Where were you?" Temujin demanded in a harsh tone. "Gojing and I just became Andas down by the river. Look, this is what he gave me," Tului replied, waving a red handkerchief with a flower embroidered on it in the air. It was something that Li Ping made for Gojing. Reminded of the time he and Jamuka became Andas as kids, Temujin's face immediately became calm. "What did you give him?" he asked the two cute and innocent kids standing in front of him. "This," Gojing replied, pointing to the top of his head, where Temujin saw the golden necklace that his youngest son often wore. "Now you two have to help and look after each other in the future, you hear?" Temujin said with a smile. Both of the kids nodded. "Now get on your horses," Temujin ordered. "Gojing can come with us too." Ecstatic, Gojing and Tului both mounted their horses. After another period of waiting, the Wanyan brothers finally finished dressing and exited their gurs. Wanyan Hongli, seeing the Mongolian soldiers were already in formation, immediately ordered his soldiers to fall in. However, Wanyan Hongxi, determined to put the Mongolians in their place, took his time slowly drinking several cups of wine and ate a little breakfast before finally climbing onto his horse. After another hour of general chaos, the 10,000 Jin troops were finally in formations. The army marched northwards for 6 days before meeting up with Ong Khan's welcoming committee, comprised of Ong Khan's son Sangam and adopted son Jamuka. Upon hearing that Jamuka was here, Temujin immediately rode forth to meet him. The two men hopped off their horses and bear-hugged each other. Every one of Temujin's sons rode forth to greeting their adopted uncle as well. When Wanyan Hongli first laid eyes upon Jamuka, he saw a tall and skinny man with a few strands of gold in his mustache and a pair of eyes that were filled with energy and enthusiasm. He looked strong and spirited. Sangam, on the other hand, was fat and pale, probably from living in luxury all of his life and not at all like someone who grew up on the steppe. Not only that, he had an arrogant look on his face and seemingly ignored Temujin whenever he felt like it. A stark contrast to the warmth of Jamuka. After another day of riding, they were very close to Ong Khan's encampment when two of Temujin's advance scouts suddenly returned with news. "There are Naimans blocking the way ahead. About 30,000 of them," they reported. "What do they want?" Wanyan Hongxi asked, panicking a bit after hearing the news through his translator. "From the looks of it, they want to fight," the scouts reported. They really have 30,000 troops?" Wanyan Hongxi stuttered. "That thought's more than us this. Go and find out what's going on," Temujin ordered muckily, not waiting for Wanyan Hongxi to finish his sentence. Muckley headed off with 10 bodyguards while the rest of them stopped and waited. Muckley returned not long after. The Naimans said that since the great Jinn princes granted a title to our Khan, they want to be granted a title too, he reported. If not, then they say they will take your excellencies the princes as hostages until they too are granted titles from the great Jinn Empire. They also said that they want a title thoughts higher than our Khan Temujin's. Demanding titles by force? That thought's rebellion. What do we do? Wanyan Honks's face went pale on hearing this news. Wanyan Hongli began organizing troops into fighting positions in case of any unexpected escalations. Brother, those Naimans frequently steal our livestock and cause trouble for us. Are we really going to let them get away with this? Jamuka said to Temujin. I don't know what the Jinn princes would have us do. By now, Temujin had thoroughly surveyed the surrounding landscape and was confident of victory. Let's show the princes how the two of us do things around here. He replied to Jamuka before letting out a howl and cracking his whip in the air twice, causing the 5,000 Mongolian soldiers to simultaneously howl in response and startling the unprepared Wanyan brothers. A cloud of dust had appeared ahead as the enemy slowly approached, forcing the advance scouts to return. Brother, order our boys to charge now. Wanyan Honksi said. These Mongols are of no use now. Let them fight first, Wanyan Hongli whispered back. Immediately understanding his brother's intentions, Wanyan Honksi simply nodded and sat back. The Mongolian soldiers let out another loud shout but did not move. What on earth are these Mongols doing shouting like rabid dogs? Wanyan Honksi frowned. It's not like they are going to scare the enemy away no matter how loud they are. On the left side of the formation was Borokal. Follow me and don't fall behind. See how we defeat our foes, he instructed to Louis, who, along with Gojing, was shouting at the top of their lungs just like the others. In a heartbeat, the approaching army emerged out of the cloud of dust only a few paces away. Yet the Mongolians still did nothing but shout. This time it was Wanyan Hongli who got nervous, seeing how spirited the Naimans were. Fearing his formation would be broken if they continued unimpeded, he ordered, "Fire arrows." The Jin army discharged several volleys, but because of the distance between the two armies, most of the arrows fell onto the ground before reaching the enemy. Frightened by the ferociousness showing on his enemies' faces as they gritted their teeth and charged at full speed, Wanyan Honksi began to panic. Why don't we just give them what they want? Give them some bullshit title and be done with all this? He turned around and suggested to Wanyan Hongli. So what if the title is a little big? It's not like we are going to lose anything. Suddenly, Temujin cracked his whip in the air several times. The Mongolian army immediately stopped shouting and split into two groups. Temujin and Jamuka, each leading a wing, immediately heading towards the high ground on either side. The two of them leaned down into their horses and galloped along with their troops, shouting out orders as they rode. The Mongolian troops split up into smaller and smaller groups so that, in a very short amount of time, they occupied the high ground in every direction. With the height advantage, the Mongols loaded arrows onto their bows and aimed at the opposing army, but not firing. The leader of the Naimans, sensing that he was in a disadvantageous position, ordered his troops to head straight for the high ground. The Mongolian troops set up soft walls made of several layers of fleece to shield themselves from arrows. The bowmen shot from behind the walls as the troops stationed on the nearby high ground fired arrows in support as well. With the enemy on either side of them, confusion descended upon the Naimans as they tried to attack both sides. "Jelm, attack the rear!" Temujin shouted, seeing the opposing army had become disorganized from his position on the left. With a huge saber in hand, Jelm led a group of 1,000 soldiers down in a charge and cut off the enemy's retreat. Jeb, determined to slay the enemy general in order to show his gratitude to Temujin for sparing his life, was at the front of the charge with his spear sticking out in front of everyone. Being hit head-on by a charge like this, The Naaman rear collapsed in chaos, and their forward units were shaken as well. The Naaman general was at a loss as to what to do next when Jamukha and Sengam began to charge down from their positions as well. Attacked from both sides, the Naaman army completely collapsed before long. The leading general turned around and tried to escape, followed by several retainers as they headed back in the direction they had come from. Jelm didn't order a pursuit and let most of the opposing army go by. Only when there were about 2,000 enemies left did he order his army to charge out and block their retreat. With nowhere to go, the brave Naaman soldiers that were left either fought to the death or laid down their weapons and surrendered. In this brief battle, the Mongols killed over 1,000 foes and captured over 2,000 while sustaining only a little over 100 casualties. Temujin ordered all captives be stripped of their armor and split into 4 equal groups, one for the Wanyan brothers, one for his adopted father Ongkon, one for sworn brother Jamukha, and one for himself. All Mongolian families that had a relative die in the battle received 5 horses and 5 captives as slaves as compensation. Only now did Wanyan Hongxi finally calm down from his fright. They want a title? Brother, why don't we give them the title of ambassador of the defeated losers? Ha ha. He could not stop talking about the battle that just occurred. The Mongolian victory, in spite of being outnumbered, made Wanyan Hongli even more nervous than he was before the battle. At this moment, the only reason that our northern borders are safe is that the northern tribes are battling amongst themselves. If Temujin or Jamukha ever brought all the tribes on the steppe under their rule, our great Jin Empire would no longer have any peace. He thought to himself. Other things troubled him as well. Even though his own troop of 10,000 did not enter into battle, their formation began to waver when the Naamans initially charged and there was fear on every one of their faces. The battle had not yet begun but the outcome had already been determined. Such courage and efficiency displayed by the Mongolians represented a huge threat in the future. He was still pondering things over in his mind when a cloud of dust appeared up ahead as another army approached.